afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's so great to see you all. Thanks so much for being here today. We've got a real special treat. As always, every week it's a special treat, right? Today is December 7th, 2023, and welcome to Will Work for Food, the New Possibilities Hour. As you know, we meet every week and have an amazing speaker who provides us with a presentation on a topic of interest. And there is no charge for these seminars. They're done out of the graciousness of the hearts of the speakers, for which we are grateful. And then what we ask is in return if people might make a donation to a food bank, either that the speaker has suggested or of your own preference. And then if you would let us know, please, how much it is that you've donated. We don't keep track by name, but we just have a running total, and we are getting so close to $500,000. I just can't wait to cross that line. That is millions and millions of meals. So Natalie, what's our number for today that we know of, donations we know of?
Hi, Jean. Thanks so much. Today's number is $487,432.43. So that is millions and millions of meals served due to the generosity of our attendees. So we'll work for food. Thank you all so much.
Thank you all so much. That's just amazing. And speaking of amazing, today our speaker is Brenda Waugh. She is a lawyer, mediator, and facilitator at Waugh Law and Mediation, where she mediates conflicts that involve civil cases, family matters, elder law, business and estate disputes in Virginia and West Virginia. She facilitates restorative justice processes and has collaborated with several schools and communities to implement restorative justice initiatives. Brenda has both a law degree and a master's degree in conflict resolution. She's practiced law since 1987 as an assistant prosecuting attorney, counsel to the West Virginia Senate Judiciary Committee, and as a clerk to the West Virginia Supreme Court. Brenda completed her first mediation training with the West Virginia State Bar in 1999. She is certified by the Virginia Supreme Court and the West Virginia Supreme Court to mediate court-referred family law matters and as a mentor. So we're very honored to have Brenda with us today. Today, she's going to speak about self-determination and mediation and controlling the process. What happens when parties to the council try to wrestle control of the mediation session from the mediator? Whose process is in mediation anyway? I don't know. Well, I know who I think, but Brenda, why don't we turn it over to you? You tell us what you think. And if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about your food bank, the Blue Ridge area food bank, I think it is. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jean and Natalie. Thank you guys for having me here today. This is I think this is a topic I'm hoping is going to be more of a discussion than a talk. So I hope everybody will feel free to unmute yourself or chat anytime you would like to add something. The Blue Ridge Food Bank serves this area here in the Blue Ridge Mountains here in Virginia. It serves a number of counties and has been in existence for, I can't even remember the number of years, for quite some time. We've been supporting them for about 10 years, and they do great work. So I hope that you will donate to either the Blue Ridge Area Food Bank or the one that's in your community. So I can start sharing my screen, and it's like I missed the first couple of, hold on one second. So our program today is called Hijacked, and I'll tell you a little bit how I came up, why I'm using that term. I'm going to speed through some preliminary matters, including a few introductions. I'm going to explain where the written materials can be located, how continuing legal education will operate. So a little more introduction about getting to know me, and this will help you understand a little bit about how I came up with this topic. I did grow up in this area, and I've been a lawyer since '87 and a mediator since about 2009. And when I was growing up, I grew up in the shadow of Dulles Airport being built. I also grew up as an adolescent in the 1970s. So I think that those two things have kind of converged, so that when I think of Hijacked, I think of those the panic of those movies from the 1970s. And a lot of them were comedies, some of them were not meant to be comedies, but were. But that panic whenever the pilot and the passengers realized that the plane's not going where they thought. So I think that I was greatly influenced by growing up in the shadow of Dulles Airport. The bottom picture is a picture of me and my daughter, Alexa, and we are doing a 5K on the runway at Dulles Airport. So top pictures when it was being built, and the bottom one is a few years ago. So I'd like to know a little bit about who you are. If you don't mind, please type in the chat box your name, where you are from, and I would like for you to type in one word in the chat box of something, a phrase or a word that you always say in mediation. It's kind of a funny thought, but what's a word you always say? So just if you can type your name and where you're from and what you always say during mediation. Impartial. It's up to you. Jesse, that was exactly mine was. It's your decision, because I feel like I'm a little bit of a broken record from saying two things. It's your decision, and I don't give legal advice, but it's your decision and it's your choice is a big one. And that's a neutral. And that's a big part about being a mediator. Listen, asking the parties to listen, Taylor. Confidential. I'm not a judge. That's another good one. Let's get this settled today. So thank you. Please feel free to keep typing, because I would love to know where you're from and hear what these words are. I think they tell us a lot about the way we approach mediation and whose process we may think it is. I also want you to feel free, if I'm talking too fast or skipping over something, to type in the chat box for me to slow down, or raise your hand or interrupt me, and I'll be happy to slow down and spend more time in an area. I wanted to give you you can find me. These are my social media spots and my email. The picture I picked here is where to find me. It's here in the Blue Ridge Mountains here in Virginia. I'm up there hiking very, very often. And so you're actually more likely to find me up hiking in the mountains than on social media, but you can certainly reach me through those addresses. If you would like written materials from today, you can use this QR code, or you can screenshot the URL there. And on my website, I've got written materials. They include a very short paper that summarizes a lot of this. I've got a few infographics that help to kind of crystallize some of the ideas and remind us of what we need to do before, during, and after mediation to make sure we've got the right balance between self-determination and integrity of the process. So some of you may be here from Virginia or West Virginia, or a state like California or Texas who has reciprocity with most states. I know for sure we've been approved in Virginia and West Virginia. It is only for the live session. The recorded session has not been approved for continuing legal education credits. Here is the West Virginia course number. It's 1.2 credits. In Virginia, it's 1 credit. And we will have codes throughout the presentation that you need to mark down and keep handy. And then you absolutely must email me your name and your bar number and email address to get credit in Virginia or West Virginia. So if you're watching this to get CLE, please email me at BrendaWaugh.com with your bar number and your email address so that I can get you the certificate that you will need to have to be able to get your credits in those 2 states. And yeah, other states, I understand from my discussion earlier with Natalie and Jean that Texas and California have reciprocity with most other states. And others, sometimes if you say it's been approved, they may approve it. So you can check out with your state bar and see what their criteria might be. So now let's get to the part about the hijacked mediation. So this goes back to this question: where does this metaphor come from? What made me possibly think of this metaphor? I told you a little bit about, those 1970s skyjacked or hijacked movies and growing up in the shadow of Dulles Airport. So at one point I was mediating a case involving a small business, and the owner and one of the primary managers wanted to meet with me in mediation. And they presented it as that the owner had been accused of sexual misconduct. And what they wanted to do is to reform the company in a way that the owner would have very little or almost no contact with the company, perhaps not even a lot of financial investment. They were kind of trying to negotiate how to reform the company so that the owner would not be in that position again. So I took on the mediation and agreed to do it. But during the course of it, the owner was very difficult to work with. And at one point, the owner told me that, and I think this is after we'd already done 2 or 3 sessions, the owner said, well, what we really need to do here is have some restorative justice. if we have restorative justice, we can get through this and be done with it. He said, I just want the people that have said this stuff about me to come in here and I can hear what they can say and I can confront them. And I'm like, whoa, what is going on here? And I thought, I've just been hijacked. We were going to point A. We were going to work out an agreement on how to restructure this company. We were going on a way so that the employees could work there and feel safe. But all of a sudden, we're taking a big turn and trying to go into a completely different process that, in my opinion, did not do anything but to resemble restorative justice. And I thought, my gosh, that's what it's like being hijacked. You're going one place and somebody uses their control, their power, perhaps any tools, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, to divert you into a different place. So I don't know how well this is going to work. I did this in person, and I think online is going to be a little more difficult, but let's try. I'd like you to raise your hand if you agree with these statements. I think there's a little tool at the bottom of the screen that you can pick to raise your hand. Is that under, where is that located, Natalie or Jean? Do you guys know?
You can look under reactions.
So under reactions, you can raise your hand, and I'd like you to raise your hand if you agree with this statement. And hopefully we'll be able to see how many people are raising their hands. Doing this in person, it's nice because we stand up and you can look around the room and kind of get a sense of the way other mediators might look at it. So the first thing, raise your hand if you agree. I'm a mediator. It's my process and it's their problem. Raise your hand if you agree. The primary goal of mediation is to reach a settlement. Raise your hand if you agree. I have experienced a party trying to gain control over the mediation process. Raise your hand if you agree. I've experienced a lawyer trying to gain control over the mediation process. Raise your hand if you agree. I always suggest ground rules. Raise your hand if you agree. I remain open to supporting any discussion of ground rules that the parties suggest, but I don't raise the topic. Raise your hand if you agree. It's my practice to never meet in caucus. Raise your hand if you agree. It's my practice to facilitate most of my mediations in caucus. Raise your hand if you agree. I ask the parties to decide if they want their lawyers present for the mediation. And raise your hand if you agree. I routinely email with parties outside of the mediation. Now, does anybody have any comments? You can either unmute yourself or type something in the chat box about any of these questions that you were surprised about, or what you think about these questions. What do they have to do with mediation? What do they have to do with control? Anybody have any ideas or comments? When I do this live, I end up seeing a lot of people stand up at different points. Almost everybody agrees that they've experienced a party and a lawyer trying to gain control of the mediation process. But it's very interesting to watch. There's a lot of divergence in whether or not people use ground rules. And we're going to talk about that in a bit, why it's important, about how emails work in between mediations, and about really whether people think about mediation being only for settlement or for other purposes, such as improving relationships. So those are some questions that will lead us in and get us thinking a little bit about what we do and maybe assumptions we make about our own practice and what that does with respect to setting us up to be hijacked. So let's talk a little bit more about the metaphor. And is flying a plane like facilitating a mediation? I think I hinted towards this before, that it feels like to me, everybody's agreeing to go to a certain place. And we're kind of the pilots trying to get them to the place. Maybe everybody's agreeing to go to settlement. Maybe everybody's agreeing to come up with a parenting plan that's best for the children. Maybe everybody's agreeing to just check the box off and tell the court that they mediated. But hopefully everybody's got a bit of a consensus on what we're doing here and where we're going. And the mediator's job is to take them there. And I want to take a quick pause into explaining the metaphor because I want to kind of carve out some space for transformative mediation. When I was thinking about this metaphor about mediators being pilots, I think it tends to be less accurate in transformative mediation. And so when we're thinking this through and thinking of the utility of it, transformative mediation may be a little bit of an exception to some of this, because perhaps transformative mediators don't feel that they're pilots. They may feel that the parties are the pilots and that they're an air traffic controller or they are co-pilots or something. So I feel like with transformative mediation, the metaphor is a little bit different. So we can go back now to exploring this metaphor. And in exploring the metaphor, I really, I was thinking about what makes a good pilot. So I did a Google search and looked a number of places, and I came up with a website that that was recruiting pilots. And these are the skills that they articulated that pilots should have. And I loved reading this list, because this list made me go, oh, we have a lot of the same skills. Perhaps not the mathematic and creative skills combined. Sometimes I know that mathematics can challenge some mediators, but I think we end up having to be pretty skilled in it often, regardless of our natural inclination. But these qualities of a good pilot seem to fit the idea of what makes for a good mediator. So somebody has typed in that we might be pilots, but sometimes the plane gets revised in the air, and we might land in a different airport that was promised. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later too, about going to a different airport that was promised. But I agree with you, Sanford, that that we might have to change the plan. And I guess if we want to play with the metaphor more, when everybody's going on a certain trip, if I'm flying across country to Los Angeles, we may end up having some really bad weather over Kansas, and we were supposed to be going that way. But when we see that way is going to not be a good way to go, the pilots help to take us a different way. We still get to where we were going, but the route might have to change. And I think that that in mediation, that metaphor applies. And that kind of goes a little bit to this last criteria here, is knowing when to break the rules. I think that the pilots have to have rules that they can break. And I think that as mediators, we have general rules and guidelines that we follow all the time. But sometimes there has to be they don't work. And I think we have to know when that's appropriate, when it's ethical, and when it's not. So I will move on and look at this metaphor a little more by looking at the definition of hijacked. And so we have two definitions here. One is very direct, taking control of the plane, but the other one is pretty interesting, because it says to take control of something that does not belong to you for your advantage. And that business owner that was trying to take control of that mediation that day, he was absolutely trying to take control of something that didn't belong to him. It belonged to everybody that was part of that mediation. And he was wanting to take control of it because he wanted to gain an advantage. And so I feel like that definition of hijack helps support this idea, this metaphor a little more. Here we have kind of a direct comparison of the airplane hijacking and mediation hijacking, and why that metaphor tends to really be kind of helpful and suitable, and a way to think about it. And in using this metaphor as a way to think about it, I want to think about, what can we learn? What do pilots and what do air traffic folks do that we as mediators can learn from to help us keep from being hijacked? So again, here's this metaphor, and again, it tends to work. It tends to help inform us of a way we may approach our mediation, looking at trying to maintain that control, but still there's a lot of choice in where you're going and how you've decided to get there. So when we think about air traffic and what happens to prevent hijackings since those bad 1970s movies were made, we can look and see that there are a number of categories. What these pilots do, what the air traffic folks do, what the airlines do to help prevent hijackings. So I'm going to go through those and look at those, and then we're going to look and see how that might translate into what mediators might do to prevent a hijacking in a mediation. Of course, we all know about screening. Before the 1970s, hijackings with screenings, they often didn't happen, or you showed somebody your driver's license before you got on the plane. Now screening is much more extensive. And what's happening is you're really checking out the passengers before they book, before they arrive at the airport, and before they get on the plane. So the same thing happens with mediation. We need to make sure our screening helps to prevent the hijacking. The things to screen for, and I've put a list up here of the things that I think are important to screen for. Can anybody think of anything else you think it's important to screen for if you are concerned that you may have somebody that may try to hijack your mediation. What else do you screen for besides these types of things? You can either unmute yourself or feel free to type something in the chat box. Anybody have anything else besides? I think most of us tend to screen for history of violence. And I think that we're probably looking at power imbalance and implicit bias while we're screening or while we're doing mediation orientation or pre-mediation meetings. And I think we're probably all pretty good about the divergent expectations and missing stakeholders. I think the things that are more difficult are experiences of trauma and neurodiversity. I don't think historically mediators have always screened for things like experiences of trauma or neurodiversity. And that can certainly lead to some hijacking because it's going to greatly impact the relationship of the parties in the mediation. Tim Olson typed in cluelessness, and I think that means, I'm going to guess that means like not really understanding what they're doing there, why they're there, what they're supposed to do, what this is for, and narcissism. So those are some other things that you may screen for to be on the lookout for a hijacker. Thank you for typing that in, Tim. The next thing is finding the weapons. What are the weapons of the hijacker? That guy that tried to hijack my mediation, when he realized he was running into difficulty with that with me, he started attacking the mediation process, and then he started to personally attack me. That was his weapon. And that is one of the weapons to look for. And that idea of the attacks on the identity and ego. And I think it's hard for us when we are mediators and we work hard to get where we are. We feel confident in what we're doing. And then somebody is attacking us in order to try to gain control. It's hard to keep that check and to be able to remain calm when that happens. I certainly wanted to just scream at him and tell him to get the heck away from me, but I was able to check it, pull back and say, no, this is what's going on here. I need to figure out how to respond to this in a way that he doesn't gain control over this process. So the other weapons are, that you guys are probably all familiar with is certainly interruption. And I added emotions to this list at a prior session I did on this topic, because one of the mediators said that they've seen people use emotions to try to manipulate the other parties, or their attorneys or the mediator. And that sometimes the mediator has to be aware that an emotional response can be genuine and heartfelt, and other times it could actually be a weapon where they're trying to manipulate you and gain control over that mediation. Anybody think, okay, here's some more weapons. Physical presence of intimidation, disrespect, gaslighting, and physicality is intimidation. Absolutely, that physical presence when someone is either they're just bigger or they are positioning themselves in such a way to try to gain control of the room and certainly gain control over the other party. Coercion and power dynamics. I'm glad you brought that up, and we're gonna spend a little more time talking about that right now. Who brought that up? Tina, thank you. I don't know if we're going to be able to do the little experiment that I wanted to do, but maybe we can try. So I want to think about power and balance and think about where you stand. And I want you to think about when you're going into a mediation and you're going through a mediation, are you thinking about that power and balance? And are you thinking about that in a way where you're able to maintain that integrity of the process? This is definitely a place where that self-determination and integrity of the process could collide, because one party may want to exert a lot of power over the other party. They may be in a position of power. They may have a lot more money, a lot more privilege, a lot more time, and they're just exploiting that to their advantage. And as a mediator, we have to figure out how to try to work to make that power imbalance not be so significant. Now, I have a little exercise to do that involves 2 volunteers. Let me see how we're doing on time to see if I think we have time to do this. I don't think we do. So I'm just going to tell you guys how that would work. What would happen is you can take, what I like to do is I take 2 objects and I bring folks up to the room and I ask them to take these 2 objects. And I have one here. One's my notary stamp and one is a little pen. And so I asked the 2 volunteers to please balance these on a table. So if you got a table here, you're going to just balance this, or you're going to balance this. Well, the volunteer who's balancing this can balance it really easy. Just takes, all you got to do is sit around the table and it balances. The volunteer who has this pen tries to balance it, and it's never going to happen. It's going to keep falling over. So they've got a resource, power, and balance in that exercise. The people that are coming to that exercise, you may say, well, here, I'm giving you both an object, take the object and balance it. This is fair, it's equal. You guys are standing on the same ground here, just each of you balance it. Well, no, you've got different resources that you're bringing to the table. And the thing is, we have the same issue of power imbalances in mediation. The parties that are coming to the table will rarely have the same resources. And to ask them to be able to participate equally when they've got different resources without even recognizing and having that awareness within ourselves definitely sets us up for the more powerful party to be able to hijack the mediation. So let me ask you all, I gave you the answer to this question. What type of power imbalance do you see? That's a resource power imbalance. Other types of power imbalances, can anybody think of any other power imbalances that you might see in mediation besides resource power imbalances? What other power imbalances might we see? Power imbalances that may be financial, but there could be other power imbalances: authority, cultural, intellect, information. Anybody have any other ideas on power imbalances that you are aware of, or that you worry about, or that you think about? Religious, innate intelligence, emotional, social, and financial. Financial power imbalances. Definitely. And then does anybody have any sense, what it might feel like if you're the person who says, here, take this, you're supposed to put this on the table and make it stand up. Or you're the person with this notary stamp, here, put this on the table and make it stand up. What do you think it feels like to come into a mediation or come into an exercise like this and say, I can't do that because I don't have the same things everybody else has? Anybody have any ideas to comment on what it feels like to be the one with the least power, whether you're doing this exercise or if you're in mediation? Or what it feels like to be the one with more power when you come in. Scary. Yeah, when you're another power imbalance, linguistic, helpless. Yes, when you have less power, helpless, defeated before starting, hopeless. Absolutely, all of those things. And so again, this is where we have to be so aware of the power imbalance when we're thinking about mediation and we're thinking about hijacking. Because if we don't work to keep that balance, the person that has the more power is going to be able to exploit that and try to hijack or gain control over the mediation. So here's a code to capital LW1 for the Virginia CLE. Please write that down. To capital LW1. Now back to our regular program. Back to what the airlines are doing to keep from being hijacked, that we might be able to take some notes from and think about with our mediations, with boarding. Boarding to make sure, of course, in the airline, they're boarding, to make sure everybody's got a boarding pass and going to the same right place. Same thing for mediation. We can screen, we can make sure we start the mediation, and we can check in periodically to make sure everybody is still wanting to go to the same place. And I think that that's where it comes back to making sure they have shared expectations. And that also, to me, a real question is, are they selected the right ADR process? Should they be in mediation? Should they be in arbitration? Should they be in collaborative law? Is mediation the right place for them? And did they select the right kind of a mediation process? Is this a case where one party wanted something very transformative and the other wanted somebody that'd be very directive and evaluative? And so had the participants decided on the right ADR process and the right style of mediation and the right mediator? Are they on the same page? Are they boarding the same plane? Are they taking a trip to the same process? And so that is another thing that we can learn from the airlines to try to prevent our hijackings, is to check to make sure the participants are on the right plane. The next one is And before I go on, let me ask, does anybody have any other ideas on boarding, the things that you might check beforehand to make sure to try to prevent hijacking? Anybody have anything? Please feel free to unmute or type it in the chat box if you can think of anything that you do to prevent a hijacking during the boarding process, whether the boarding process is the first phone call, the boarding process is a screening, the boarding process is a pre-mediation meeting, or the boarding process is that first 5-10 minutes. I think if you were around last year, I did the first 5 minutes, that first 5 minutes of mediation. So anybody have any other ideas? If not, we'll go on then and talk about the next thing that the airlines are doing. Of course, they have the cockpit door to protect the mediator. So the pilots are protected from the hijacker by a physical barrier, the cockpit door. When I first had this idea, I was talking to a friend of mine who mediates in Northern Ireland, and she said, you know, I think that ground rules are the cockpit door and the barrier to protect the mediator from the unauthorized contact. She said, I think it's ground rules. Well, when she said that, I was like, well, I don't always use ground rules. So am I flying with the door open? It's like, what are they? So I think that it probably depends upon the mediator and the parties and what the mediation is looking like. But it seems like there has to be some type of a boundary or barrier to make sure the process stays safe and that the mediator is safe from getting either an overt threat or covert threats, little stabs, little jabs to try to undermine the mediator's confidence, authority, process. And then, of course, I wrote in that sometimes a barrier is in mediation online. You can always use the mute button or move people into a breakout room. And I don't know if you guys have ever done this, and I've only done it once, maybe twice, where I was doing a divorce mediation and the parties wouldn't stop talking over one another. And I was like, okay, guys, we're going to have to, you really have to talk one at a time. And they just kept going and kept going. I said, no, guys, really, one at a time, please, one at a time. They just kept going. Finally, I muted both of them and said, okay, here's where we're at. Let's go back and talk about what we need to do to be respectful in this process. So I guess we could think about breakout rooms and mute buttons as being a kind of an online barrier. So the other thing that was that I think was in the guide that I saw for preventing hijackings was to be alert and aware of details. And I really, really like this one for mediation because I think my daughter told me that she had read a study recently that mediators have an extraordinary amount of ability to take in all kinds of information that is in the room going on during the mediation. And so I think those details these are some of the details that many of us are paying attention to make sure we can prevent a hijacking. Can anybody think of any other details besides body language, patterns of discussion, moods, thinking about breaks, any other details that you're very acutely aware of to make sure that that perfect balance between self-determination and integrity in the process is being maintained? Anybody have any other ideas, details? What else do you do? What are you looking for to see if somebody's about to suggest that you go somewhere else in this mediation? Any other details? Eye contact, yes. Making eye contact and keeping that eye contact going. And then when someone wants to drop it, try to figure out what's going on. Are they uncomfortable? Are they traumatized? Do they have another plan? Looks like Tina might have typed in silence. I'm not sure. Tina, do you want to unmute and explain that? Or do you want to type in what you meant by that? Or was that going back to a different topic?
Silence, I pay attention to eye contact, silence. I thought you were asking some of the things you look for where I might want to have a caucus with someone because their body language is signaling they're uncomfortable. Did I get that right?
That's great. So those are some details you're watching out for. And that is,
Yes.
You're taking those extra steps, and this all goes towards preventing the hijacking. And so that's good. That's really
Thank
great.
you.
Arms folded. Yeah, that's body language. When someone's sitting back like this, you're like, okay, this person's not engaging in the way that would be most that this person's not indicating they're engaging. What's going on? And then you have to wonder if they're going to drop out and their mind's going somewhere else. And they would definitely be somebody that might be a hijacker. Flora, you typed in volume. Can you tell us what you mean by volume? Either type it in or unmute yourself. And if you're uncomfortable doing that, if you're just quiet a second, I'll move on.
Either the very obvious of getting loud
Mhm.
or kind of along the lines of what Tina was saying, going quiet if they were participating before and they're suddenly not participating or not saying anything, or their tone or volume goes down. I guess that's still kind of part of body language, but yeah.
That's great, but it's more detailed on what body language is and these nuances that you're looking out for, and trying to, get a step ahead of a potential hijacking. So the next one is communication, and I think this is stuff that most of us have a lot of training in, and it's just a matter of being mindful of it and being aware of it all the time. But I do think also that there's the last two things I think are important. One is a shared understanding of vocabulary. Again, if we've got different kinds of vocabulary, different languages we're using, it's difficult. Somebody may drop out, and that person that's dropping out may be getting ready to hijack the process. Or maybe then the other person says, oh, hey, they dropped out, I can hijack the process now. So if someone's not understanding, you're not using the same vocabulary, maybe you're using too technical terms, maybe you're not using technical terms enough, it just needs to be a shared understanding of vocabulary. And then this one is hard for me, is what are my backup systems when the usual processes fail? And I think I was thinking about doing this presentation today and thinking about how I'm going to be doing a few things I haven't done before, and maybe it'll work and maybe it won't work. And I'm like, well, that's kind of like mediation sometimes. We all have kind of like a lot of things we do and they usually work or we wouldn't keep doing them. But sometimes you do something and it just doesn't work. And you need to regroup and move on. And so that's kind of like, I think that's what we need with these backup system of communications when the usual processes failed. When we're using the tricks that we usually use when we're using open questions, but the person still can't articulate, then what do we do? That's a usual thing about using open questions and trying to elicit information. And when the person just does this, we need a backup system to figure out, okay, what are we going to do then? And I think most of us have this. It's just it's that we need to remember that we have it, and then we need to remember to keep it handy and be very aware of it, because that is how we prevent the hijacking. Anybody, did I leave anything off? Can anybody think of anything else that you do to prevent hijackings before you ever even start the mediation? Anything you do in the pre-mediation process or during your screening or at any point in time that that you do to prevent the process? Just making a little space here if anybody's got some other suggestions on something that I haven't already covered. Okay, then we're going to move on. Got somebody? Nope. We're going to move on then and talk about what happens when the hijacking is underway. What happens, like what happened with me with that business owner? The hijacking was underway. I didn't prevent it. Maybe I could have, maybe I couldn't. I don't think that they're all preventable. So sometimes you try to prevent it, but even you've done all the things you can do. You've followed those guidelines, and nonetheless, the hijacking is underway. So what do we do to stop it, and how do we recover from it? And that's what we're going to spend the next 20 minutes working on. So here are some warning signs that you are about to be hijacked. One side is insisting on confidentiality and refuse to come out of caucus and is guarded. Anybody have any ideas why that person could potentially be a hijacker? Somebody's like saying, I want to stay in caucus the whole time and we hardly say anything. And we just want to know what the other side has to say. Why might that person be a hijacker? Why do you think that could be hijacking? Anybody?
They may have no interest in settling, but only want to get information from the other side, like free discovery.
Exactly. I think that's the most typical hijacking that we see in civil cases, is they may not have any interest whatsoever in settling. All they're there for is to see what they can find out Precisely. Thank you. That was exactly it. Yep. I don't know if that was Brett or not. We've got Maria saying they're not interested in resolving the conflict, and Brett saying they're using it as information seeking opportunity instead of a collaborative process. So that's a warning sign. It can be that somebody's scared. It can be that somebody doesn't like to share, but it can also mean that they're not there. They're not going to the same place. They didn't board the same plane, and so it's a warning sign. How about if a party is emailing a mediator privately? How do you guys handle that? Especially with pro se parties. If anybody works with pro se parties, or does workplace mediation, people that are not being represented, especially, I see this as a bigger issue there. When someone's emailing you privately, why would I include that as a possible warning sign that it may be hijacking underway? Trying to align with the mediator. Brett wrote war. Marcia, that's often it. They're trying to kind of persuade you on the side and be on your side. Yeah, trying to, they could be confused about the process. They are trying to take control. They may not understand your role and think you're their advocate. So it can be innocent, that they are just trying to figure out what's what. But it often can be that they are trying to control the mediation, trying to control you, trying to set up a dynamic where you've had these private communications, so that when you come back into the mediation, they're like, well, like we said in that email, or like you said in that email, and then the other party doesn't know, and then there's that dynamic. I actually thought of this after reading a book on transformative mediation, where they recommend that you do not email the parties outside the process, and I usually try to avoid that, because I do find that I also find that the more I email them, the more they want to email back. And so trying to say, let's all wait until we're all together to discuss this seems to be a better approach. And I do see some folks saying both parties copied on emails, and I require all communication to include all parties. So that's one way to prevent this hijacking if someone's attempting to do it by emailing the mediator privately. And then this one, and I know you guys have all seen this, that one party aggressively either insults the other party or the process. Somebody that's been court referred to mediation might be sitting there just like trashing the judge, trashing the process, or they may be insulting the other party just with little digs here and there. It could be insulting the party about their about things about their interaction. Has anybody had this experience where somebody writes in, and see, Shannon says, I don't allow trashing, cursing, and name calling. And this is the thing that you often, that is nice when you do ground rules routinely, is that you say, we have these ground rules, we're not going to speak disrespectfully. And then when somebody starts to step outside that, you can say, wait a minute, we have these ground rules. And that's where that goes back to having that barrier in place. And then that prevents it. The problem is, if this starts happening and somebody's trying to do this, this does alert you that person is trying to gain control of the process and maybe trying to hijack your process. And then there's when the other party objectifies one or the other. And I've seen this also in when someone calls somebody they know very well Mr. or Mrs. During a mediation. Sometimes this indicates that they are trying to objectify the person. They're calling them they. And again, it all goes back to the same thing, where this party is trying to use these tools to gain control over the mediation. Anybody have any experience with this, where one party tries to objectify the other and then kind of do it in a subtle way to gain control over the mediation? Anybody have any experience with that? Anything come to mind?
Yes, I had a party that was using, well, it wasn't subtle, racial epithets.
And were they directing those towards, were they doing that to make the other party uncomfortable? Were they doing it to make you uncomfortable? Were they, what do you think their motive was? Or do you think, tell me a little bit more about that, how they were using that to gain control?
It really when I look at self-determination, I think it's important for people to be authentic in the process. Unfortunately, this case was about that very issue. So, one of the reasons I felt they were using racial epithets or needed to use racial epithets was to intimidate me. Also to see if I really could be neutral and fair in the process. It was a test. It was one of the motivations. And also derailing the process, hijacking it. That was very clear. Since the mediation is not about me, because I don't spend time objectifying people, that really is their problem. That's how I looked at it. So they didn't get a reaction. They really wanted a reaction, but I was there to get them through the process fairly, and that's what I did. I was there to do my job to help them resolve the case.
That's a tough one, Tina. That's tough. And that does go back to them objectifying the other party, and then also attacking you and attacking your identity in order to try to gain control over the process and hijack it. And well, we're going to talk in a minute about what you do when someone's gotten beyond the preliminary steps of hijacking, and what you can do. And it sounds like that you were paying attention to those details and trying, and also it sounds like you're having to be thinking on your feet and trying to figure out, how do I not let this hijacking take place? This person is trying to control me. What do I do so that they're not controlling me? And it sounds like that that was very difficult, and I think it sounds like you did a good job with that.
I appreciate that. I think also that they feed off of our energy in the process, and when they don't get that reaction that they need, then they can self-correct as an adult, and knowing what they're doing is inappropriate and interrupting the process. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see. When someone's unprepared, that can be a sign that you've got a hijacker among you. And this kind of goes back to the very first one where somebody refuses to say anything. If someone's unprepared, they may be just showing up to check the box and say, see, I was here. And then here the other party is like putting their heart into it and showing up and all that. And this one is just showing up. They're not prepared. They don't care about anything. Their objectives might not be aligning. They might not be going to the same place. And they may be pretty willing to hijack or disrupt the process quickly. Of course, this is kind of a no-brainer that you might have a hijacker if you've got an interrupter. But I think the harder thing to do is to figure out, when you've got an interrupter, how much time to let them interrupt. Do you let them do you tell them the first time to stop it? And then sometimes you get parties, and that's the way they kind of communicate. They interrupt with each other all the time. So I think this is another one of these areas that the really skilled mediator needs to be pretty focused on details to try to figure out the context. But an interrupter can often be the start of a mediation of a hijacking, because the interrupter is trying to gain control over the conversation and the discourse, and will try to direct it in their own course. So be aware of an interrupter. And this is a tough one. Lawyers that won't let their clients talk. They may be trying to hijack the process because they may have other objectives. So I would love to hear from you guys a little bit about what you do when you have a lawyer who won't let their client speak to you, either in caucus or in a joint session. Any suggestions when you go back to you're in caucus and you talk to the other lawyer and they say, my client's not going to talk about this. I'll answer all your questions. That's clearly the lawyer getting control over that part of the process. What do you do about it? Marcia says she specifically directs the question to the client by name first. Anybody else have ideas on what you do if the lawyer doesn't want to permit you to talk to the client? And anybody have any ideas what you can do to prevent a hijacking when that's happening? I mean, clearly, if the lawyer is not allowing you to speak with a client, you're not in control of the process anymore. Everything you're learning is coming through the lawyer. Sanford says, very politely say, I would like to hear from Ms. Client. Linda says, I remind the lawyer in private they're required to participate in good faith, and their behavior is not in good faith. It sounds like you guys have some experience in this area. So here's another code for those folks. Let me go back. Alex has focused on self-determination. The client is the self. Counsel is representation. I make that distinction clear. If they persist, I remind counsel they work for the client, and that they only do so if they know what their client wants. So let their client talk. That's a good way to approach it, Alec. And it's hard. It's hard when a lawyer doesn't want his client to speak with you and thinks that that's being a good advocate. Here's your code for Virginia 2B2M. Any other, type in the chat, anybody else have any other warning signs that alert you to an impending mediation hijacking? Anybody have any others? Anybody have any other warning signs where you say, wait a minute, this person's trying to take control over this process? Did I get them all? I don't think so. I feel certain there's a few more out there. Anybody got any others? When one party starts to rattle off their research about the law. Again, there's another time when somebody's starting to rattle off their research about the law. That person is trying to gain control over the process because they may not be trying to, but it may be intentional, it might not be intentional, but that starts to make them look like the expert. They're the ones who has the authority to talk here. And that may be an attempt for them to try to gain control over the process. When one party declines mediation appointments and delays meetings for a variety of reasons. Yeah, so one person says they want to mediate or they're court ordered to mediate, but they don't show up. Rescheduling and avoiding. It's pretty clear they don't want to mediate, and for some reason they are being required to, so they are trying to sidetrack things any way they can come off with. Attorneys rattling off their hard costs and what they need to clear to meet the client's expectations of recovery. Again, that's another clear time where that lawyer is trying to gain control over the mediation process by putting the attention on them and getting very positional to make sure that they look like the authority. They look like the person who's directing that. That was all great, guys. So now what do we do after the plane's been hijacked? Here's what the airlines do. They make control with their air traffic controllers and have a special communication code. And so then they figure out what's going on with the hijackers to go through a number of possibilities. And here are the possibilities that they look at, remaining on the tarmac, negotiate with the hijackers, go into the hijackers' destination. I think we talked about that before. Pretending to go to the hijacker's destination. And when I was working on this initially, I read a book about hijackings back in the 60s and 70s. And one of the things they would do is, I think that they were talking about building a fake airport so that people would think that they landed in Cuba when they weren't actually in Cuba. So pretending to go to a destination, diverting the flight to land immediately, or confront the hijacker and then attempt to isolate them. So if we take those and kind of translate those into the mediation, these are some options that we would have with mediation. And I think most of the time it's going to have to at least be a pause. There's going to have to at least be some type of a delay, some type of a time period where things are going to be maintained so that you can try to get underneath what's going on to figure out whether or not you can maintain the mediation. Those of you who have been hijacked before in a mediation, tell me what you did. Did you do any of these things on this list? Did you do something off this list? You can type it in the chat box or you can unmute yourself. A timeout, seat outside of the process triangle. I ask them what's concerning them about, this is back about the lawyers. Take a break. Take time and chat with co-mediators. Yes, your co-mediator could be like calling the tower with getting the code to ask the co-mediator, what do you think that you should do? Call them out and take a break. And taking a break, sometimes if you can just even get away yourself for a while and reflect and say, okay, here's what's happened. And here's where I'm seeing the options. And then maybe you can come back and start working with the parties to figure out some other options. Any other ideas on what to do to recover from an attempted hijacking? Any other ideas how to recover? I mean, what do you guys think though? The problem one of the problems I have is in the one that I had with the business owner, I had to just suspend it because I thought that business owner was so out of line. And I feel like that in some ways that business owner succeeded. I mean, the people that wanted to get to their destination didn't get to go. This person, Alex says he had a pro se client question the process. It began a joint session rather than go to caucus. I simply affirmed I'm the mediator and this is how I'm conducting the mediation. We can discuss the transformative method if you need. So if somebody feels like you're being too heavy-handed in the way you're handling mediation, you can ask them if they want to change frameworks and discuss that with the parties. That is another way to address it. And I think there's probably an endless number of good ways to possibly recover from an attempted hijacking. So that is it. If anybody has any questions, I will put my contact information back up there if you need it. And I will be stopping my camera so that I can just answer any questions. If you guys have any, you can put them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and I can see your video. Anybody have any other questions? Now, guys, let me tell you, because Virginia is very persnickety, we got 3 more minutes. So I need to get some questions. We need 3 minutes of questions or comments.
Wow. How's that?
I have a comment, Brenda. I just did a transformative training, and it's so very different in terms of the role of the mediator in those. And you've mentioned that a couple of times, so I don't know what your experience is. And I know you do a lot of restorative stuff. So I don't know what your experience is in transformative and how you manage hijackers in that scenario. Because it feels like, just from the training that I had, that every time you're hijacked, it feels like you're going to need to end it. And there has to be a better way to handle it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a new book out. It's back here on my shelf somewhere. I do this all the time when I want to show a book and I never can find the right one. I read a book not too long ago on transformative mediation, and I was thinking that that the mediators that are least likely to be hijacked are transformative and highly evaluative. It seems like those two situations are less likely to lose control of the process, because in transformative you don't claim that you have control of the process, and when it's highly evaluative, you're doing the shuttle diplomacy, and it's much more kind of contained and easier to control. But I don't know. I'm troubled by transformative mediation and power imbalances. I respect mediators that use that format. I don't think, for the work I do or my personality or a number of reasons, that it's not something I can do. However, I do believe that this metaphor doesn't necessarily hold for transformative mediators, because I don't believe they think that the mediator is the pilot. The clients are the pilots, and the mediators are kind of there to help structure. So I don't think I answered your question very well, but I do.
You did, because I've been having a hard time wrapping my brain around how to use it. I think there's some value in certain scenarios where it would be effective, but giving the whole process over just seems it's counterintuitive to me. So I agree with you.
Yeah, and Marcia's asked a question about that. What are the limits and line between being controlled the process as a transformative mediator and client self-determination in both agreements and process? Marcia, I think that's the question about all mediation, really. What is the line? I think that when we first looked at self-determination and mediation, in the research I've done in that area, a lot of it focuses on self-determination and outcome and self-determination and results. I don't think there was a lot of self-determination in process when we first started getting into mediation, and the ABA came out with the rules and the guidelines in 2005, I think it was. So I think as far as the role of self-determination in process, that I think we're still kind of working through that. I think that most of the mediators I know that will talk about what process we're going to use, and we'll check in with the parties to see if this is the process they want. Talk about the steps. Sometimes even when I'm moving around in mediation, I'll say, I think we should do this next. Is that okay with you? So I'm trying to always find that balance between self-determination and integrity of the process. But I feel like if I just give it all up and say, what do you guys want to do? That I'm not doing anything to address power imbalances. And I'm not doing anything to make sure that we're going to the destination that we were all kind of on board to go.
Sounds
So-
good. And that note,
That's a wrap.
it's a wrap. We all know where we want to go. We want to get there, and we do not want to be hijacked, correct?
Everybody wants to go to lunch. So, or here on the East Coast, everybody wants to go to lunch. You guys on the West have it.
Thank you so much, Brenda. This has been fantastic. Thank you all for being here. And I hope you're having a good holiday season. We'll see you next week. Same time, same place, different speaker. Please make your donations now, and let's get over that $500,000 mark by the year end. Thanks again. And actually next week, I think, Natalie, that's our last program for the year. We'll be taking the next 2 weeks off. So be here. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.